I stood outside St. Matthew's Cathedral on a gray October morning, watching my own family file into my mother's memorial service without me. Through the ornate glass doors, I could see my siblings greeting mourners, accepting condolences, playing the role of grieving children, the role I was apparently no longer welcome to fill. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My sister Rebecca had made it crystal clear 3 days earlier during our phone conversation. Listen, Maya, we've talked about this as a family. Given your situation, we think it's better if you don't attend. Mom's service should be about honoring her memory, not dealing with uncomfortable questions about why her eldest daughter never amounted to anything. The words still burned, uncomfortable questions. As if my presence would somehow tarnish the pristine image they wanted to project of the Walker family legacy. I adjusted my simple black coat, the only funeral attire that didn't scream military precision, and watched through the window as my younger brother David stood at the podium, no doubt delivering the eulogy I should have been asked to write. After all, I was the one who had spent countless hours on video calls with Mom during her final months, listening to her stories, holding her hand through a screen when I couldn't be there in person due to deployments I could never explain. But they didn't know about those calls. They didn't know about a lot of things. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was standing outside in civilian clothes, invisible to my own family, just as I had been for the past 15 years. The difference was that today, for the first time in over a decade, I actually wanted to be seen. I wanted to grieve my mother properly, surrounded by the people who had known and loved her longest, even if those same people had written me off as the family disappointment years ago. My name is Maya Catherine Walker, and I'm 38 years old. To my family, I'm the eldest child who threw away every opportunity, who dropped out of college without explanation, who drifted through a series of vague jobs that never seemed to lead anywhere meaningful. I'm the daughter who missed Christmas dinners, birthday celebrations, and now apparently our mother's funeral, because my presence would be an embarrassment. What they don't know is that I'm also Rear Admiral Maya Walker, United States Navy, currently serving as Director of Naval Intelligence Operations for the Pacific Fleet. The college dropout story was a carefully constructed cover that has protected classified operations spanning 3 continents and saved more lives than I could count. But standing outside that cathedral watching my mother's casket through stained glass windows, none of my professional achievements mattered. What mattered was that the woman who had raised me, who had believed in me when no one else did, was being laid to rest, and her own children had decided I wasn't worthy to say goodbye. The decision to exclude me hadn't come as a complete shock. Family relationships had been deteriorating for years, ever since the cover story was established. My siblings had grown increasingly frustrated with what they perceived as my inability to get my life together, my mysterious absences, my vague explanations about work that never seemed impressive enough to justify missing important family events. Rebecca, now a successful pediatrician in Philadelphia, had always been the family overachiever. She was 2 years younger than me, but had surpassed every milestone I had supposedly failed to reach. Medical school, prestigious residency, marriage to a fellow doctor, 2 children who attended private schools and played instruments. She embodied everything my parents had hoped for in a daughter. David, the baby of the family at 34, had followed our father's footsteps into corporate law. He lived in the same Connecticut suburb where we'd grown up, belonged to the same country club, even attended the same church our family had been members of for generations. He was the son who had stayed close, both geographically and emotionally, the one who checked on Mom weekly and handled her affairs when her health declined. Then there was me, the mystery, the disappointment, the daughter who claimed to work in government consulting but could never explain exactly what that meant, who lived in an apartment in Washington, D.C., that seemed too expensive for someone with such an unclear career trajectory, who showed up to family gatherings looking tired, often with unexplained scars or injuries I attributed to clumsy accidents. They had stopped asking questions years ago, settling instead for polite but distant conversations during my brief visits home. The unspoken assumption was that I had squandered my potential, drifting through life without purpose or achievement. They treated me with the patient condescension reserved for family members who need to be tolerated rather than celebrate. Standing outside the cathedral, I could hear the organ music beginning, the opening hymn my mother had specifically requested. She had shared her funeral preferences with me during one of our secret video calls, when she was having a particularly difficult day during chemotherapy. "Promise me you'll make sure they play How Great Thou Art," she had whispered, her voice weak but determined. "And tell them I want the reading from Ecclesiastes, about there being a time for everything." I had promised, not knowing then that I would never have the opportunity to relay her wishes, not knowing that my siblings would plan the entire service without consulting me, assuming I either wouldn't care or wouldn't understand the significance of proper memorial tradition. The exclusion stung not just because of the immediate rejection, but because it represented years of accumulated misunderstanding. Every missed explanation, every half-truth I'd been forced to tell, every moment I'd had to choose between my duty to national security and my family's understanding had led to this moment. I was paying the ultimate price for maintaining operational security, being shut out of my own mother's farewell. Through the windows I could see the church filled with familiar faces. Neighbors who had watched us grow up, family friends who had attended every Walker milestone, my mother's book club members who had become her closest confidantes in recent years. They were all there, gathered to honor a woman who had been beloved by everyone who knew her. Everyone except, apparently, her eldest daughter. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of city traffic. I had driven down from Washington before dawn, hoping to arrive early enough to speak with my siblings privately, to somehow bridge the gap that had grown so wide between us. But Rebecca had been waiting in the parking lot, her expression making it clear that my presence was neither welcome nor expected. "Maya, you can't be here," she had said, her voice a mixture of frustration and what might have been embarrassment. "We've already explained that. Today needs to be about Mom, not about whatever drama you're going to bring." I had tried to argue, to explain that I loved our mother just as much as they did, that I deserved the chance to mourn her properly. But Rebecca had cut me off with the kind of dismissive wave she'd perfected during medical school, the gesture that indicated the conversation was over, and my opinion was irrelevant. "You made your choices, Maya," she had said, already turning away. "You chose to drop out of school, chose to keep secrets, chose to put whatever you do ahead of family obligations. You don't get to show up now and pretend you were the devoted daughter." Those words had sent me retreating to the street corner where I now stood, close enough to witness my mother's memorial, but far enough away to avoid causing the scene my siblings clearly feared I would create. The irony was that I had learned long ago to blend into crowds, to observe without being noticed, to gather intelligence without drawing attention, skills that served me well in classified operations, but felt hollow when applied to my own family's rejection. As the service continued inside, I found myself remembering the last real conversation I'd had with my mother. Not one of our secret video calls, but an actual face-to-face discussion during my brief visit home for her 72nd birthday 6 months earlier. She had cornered me in the kitchen while the rest of the family gathered in the living room, her eyes sharp despite her illness. "I know there's more to your story than you're telling us," she had said quietly, her hand warm on my arm. I just want you to understand that whatever you're protecting us from, whatever you think we can't handle, you're still my daughter. That will never change." I had wanted to tell her everything at that moment. About the Navy commission she never knew I'd received, about the operations that took me away during holidays, about the commendations gathering dust in a secure facility instead of proudly displayed on her mantle. But operational security had won out over maternal longing, as it always did. Now, standing outside her memorial service, I wondered if I had made the right choice. If protecting classified information was worth the cost of dying as a disappointment in my mother's eyes, regardless of what she might have suspected or hoped. The cathedral doors opened briefly as a latecomer hurried inside, and I caught a glimpse of the honor guard positioned near the altar, military precision in their bearing, though they wore civilian suits rather than dress uniforms. For a moment I wondered if my mother had somehow arranged for military honors despite not knowing about my actual service. But then I realized, they were probably just family friends who happened to have military backgrounds. there to support my siblings rather than honor any particular service record. As the doors closed again, sealing me out of my mother's farewell, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my secure phone and sent a message that would set in motion a chain of events none of us could have anticipated. A message that would finally reveal the truth I had carried alone for 15 years, regardless of the consequences for operational security or family relationships. Because sometimes, honoring the dead matters more than protecting the living from uncomfortable truths. Growing up in Westport, Connecticut, in the Walker household meant understanding from an early age that excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was the baseline expectation. Our colonial-style home on Maple Ridge Drive sat in a neighborhood where success was measured in Ivy League acceptances, professional achievements, and the kind of understated wealth that came from generations of careful investment and strategic career choices. My father, Judge Harrison Walker, presided over the Connecticut Superior Court with the same methodical precision he brought to family dinners. Every evening at 6 sharp, we would gather around the mahogany dining table that had been in his family for 4 generations, where conversations flowed seamlessly between current events, academic performance, and future planning. He had a way of asking questions that weren't really questions, gentle probes that revealed whether we had absorbed the day's lessons, completed our assignments, and demonstrated the kind of intellectual curiosity that would carry us forward in life. My mother, Catherine Elizabeth Walker, had been a literature professor at Yale before retiring to focus on raising us. She never let us forget that education was a privilege, not a right, and that with privilege came responsibility. Her personal library filled an entire room of our house, floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with first editions and academic texts that she encouraged us to explore freely. She had this remarkable ability to connect any conversation back to literature, finding parallels between our teenage dramas and classic novels with an ease that both impressed and occasionally exasperated us. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Life imitates art far more than art imitates life, she would say, quoting Oscar Wilde while helping us navigate friendship conflicts or academic challenges. The key is understanding which story you're living, and whether you want to be the protagonist or a supporting character in your own narrative. In the Walker family hierarchy, I had always been the trailblazer. As the eldest, I was expected to set the standard for Rebecca and David to follow. And for most of my childhood and adolescence, I had exceeded those expectations effortlessly. I was valedictorian of my high school class, captain of the debate team, editor of the school newspaper, and recipient of a full academic scholarship to Princeton University. My parents glowed with pride at graduation ceremonies and award presentations. My father would straighten his tie and beam as my name was called for various honors, while my mother would dab at her eyes with tissues she always kept prepared for such moments. They had created a kind of family mythology around my achievements, treating each success as validation of their parenting philosophy and proof that the Walker legacy was in capable hands. Rebecca, 2 years behind me, was brilliant in her own right, but always seemed to exist in my academic shadow during those early years. She excelled in sciences while I dominated humanities, but the family narrative consistently positioned me as the standard bearer. David, 6 years younger, was still finding his footing when I left for college, more interested in sports and social activities than the scholarly pursuits that had defined my teenage years. The dynamic created both opportunity and pressure. I loved being the family success story, but I also felt the weight of constantly having to prove worthy of that role. Every achievement had to be followed by an even greater one. Every academic year had to surpass the last. It was exhilarating and exhausting in equal measure. Princeton had been everything I had hoped for and more. I threw myself into international relations coursework, fascinated by the complex web of global politics and military strategy. My professors noticed my aptitude for analytical thinking and strategic planning, often calling on me to present alternative perspectives during seminars on foreign policy and national security. During my sophomore year, I discovered the Naval Reserve Officers Training Corps program almost by accident. I had been researching a paper on naval intelligence during World War II when I attended a guest lecture by a retired Navy admiral. His description of modern intelligence operations captured my imagination in a way that purely academic study never had. Here was a field where analytical skills could translate into real-world impact, where strategic thinking could literally save lives. The NROTC recruiter, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hernandez, met with me 3 times before I made my decision. She was unlike any military officer I had previously encountered, sharp, articulate, and refreshingly honest about both the opportunities and challenges facing women in naval service. The Navy needs people who can think beyond conventional parameters, she told me during our final meeting. Your academic record suggests you have the intellectual capacity for intelligence work, but intelligence work requires more than just smart thinking. It requires the ability to make decisions under pressure, to compartmentalize information, and sometimes to sacrifice personal relationships for operational necessity. Are you prepared for those realities? At 19, I thought I was prepared for anything. My parents had mixed reactions to my decision to join NROTC. My father, despite having no military background himself, appreciated the discipline and leadership training aspects of the program. He saw it as character building, another impressive line on an already distinguished resume. My mother worried about the physical demands and the potential for deployment, but she also recognized my genuine passion for the field. If this is what truly interests you, darling, she said, then you should pursue it wholeheartedly. But remember that any path worth taking requires sacrifices. Make sure you understand what you're willing to give up before you commit. Her words would prove more prophetic than either of us realized at the time. The NROTC program transformed my college experience completely. Alongside my regular coursework in international relations, I was learning navigation, military history, leadership principles, and strategic planning. The physical training pushed me beyond any athletic challenge I had previously encountered, while the leadership exercises taught me to think quickly under pressure and make decisions that affected entire teams. My academic performance remained exemplary, but my focus had shifted dramatically. While my classmates spent weekends at social events or studying in the library, I was often engaged in military exercises, leadership seminars, or specialized training programs that I couldn't discuss in detail with civilian friends. The compartmentalization began early, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. There were aspects of my military training that simply weren't appropriate to share with family or non-military friends, not because they were classified, but because they required context that civilians couldn't fully understand. The mindset, the discipline, the constant preparation for scenarios that most people never had to consider. These elements of my life gradually became separate from my identity as Harrison and Catherine Walker's accomplished daughter. During my junior year, everything changed. I had been selected for an advanced intelligence analysis program, a summer intensive that would provide specialized training in cryptography, signals intelligence, and strategic assessment. The program was competitive, accepting only 12 students nationwide, and completion would position me for immediate officer candidacy upon graduation. But the program came with requirements that extended beyond the summer session. Participants had to agree to additional security clearances, specialized training protocols, and what the recruiting officers termed enhanced operational flexibility after commissioning. The language was deliberately vague, but the implication was clear. Graduates of this program would be eligible for assignments that standard naval officers would never encounter. I accepted immediately, driven by intellectual curiosity and the thrill of being selected for something truly elite. The program exceeded every expectation, introducing me to aspects of intelligence work that I never could have imagined from academic study alone. I learned to analyze satellite imagery, intercept and decode communications, and assess threats that most Americans never knew existed. More importantly, I discovered that I had an intuitive gift for pattern recognition and strategic analysis that impressed even seasoned intelligence professionals. My instructors noted my ability to synthesize disparate information sources into coherent threat assessments, a skill that would prove invaluable in real-world operations. The summer program also introduced me to the concept of need-to-know information sharing, the foundation of all intelligence work. I learned to compartmentalize not just information, but relationships, keeping different aspects of my life in separate, secure categories. What seemed like necessary professional training at the time was actually preparation for a lifetime of strategic deception. When I returned to Princeton for my senior year, I was fundamentally changed. The world looked different when you understood the threats that existed beneath the surface of normal civilian life. International news carried layers of meaning that my classmates couldn't perceive. Political developments had implications that extended far beyond what was reported in standard media coverage. I remained the same high-achieving student my family had always known, but I was also becoming someone they couldn't possibly understand. The military mindset was reshaping how I approached everything from academic assignments to personal relationships. I was learning to think strategically about information sharing, to consider the security implications of casual conversations, and to maintain operational awareness even in seemingly safe environments. My family noticed the changes but attributed them to natural maturation and the stress of senior year academic demands. They were proud of my continued success, but didn't understand why I seemed more serious, more guarded, less likely to share details about my daily experiences. The truth was that I was already living a double life, though I didn't fully recognize it yet. I was Maya Walker, Princeton honor student and beloved eldest daughter, but I was also becoming something else, a person capable of keeping secrets, making hard decisions, and prioritizing mission objectives over personal comfort. The foundation was being laid for a career that would require me to choose between family relationships and national service, though I was still naive enough to believe I could successfully maintain both. I thought intelligence work would be an adventure, a challenging career that would make my family proud while serving my country's interests. I had no idea that within 2 years I would be forced to convince my own family that I was a failure in order to protect operations that would save thousands of lives. 3 months after graduating Princeton summa cum laude, I found myself standing in a windowless briefing room at Naval Intelligence Headquarters in Norfolk, Virginia, receiving the most consequential assignment of my life. Commander Sarah Chen, my new commanding officer, slid a manila folder across the metal tail with the kind of deliberate precision that suggested its contents would reshape everything I thought I knew about my career trajectory. "Lieutenant Walker," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades navigating the male-dominated world of naval intelligence, "your performance during officer training has been exceptional. More importantly, your psychological profile and analytical assessments indicate you possess a rare combination of strategic thinking and operational adaptability that makes you ideal for a very specific type of assignment." I opened the folder to find documents stamped with security classifications I had only read about in training manuals. The assignment details were deliberately vague, but the implications were clear. I would be joining a joint intelligence task force focused on tracking and disrupting international terrorism networks, with particular emphasis on maritime security threats in the Pacific region. What the folder didn't explicitly state, but Commander Chen made clear during our conversation, was that this assignment would require me to maintain a cover identity that extended far beyond typical operational security. Unlike standard naval intelligence officers who worked from secure facilities and returned home to normal lives, my role would involve extended deep cover operations where my real identity could never be revealed, even to family members. "The nature of the threats we're tracking," she explained, "requires operatives who can move through civilian spaces without detection. Your academic background, your family's social connections, and your lack of obvious military bearing make you particularly valuable for assignments where traditional military personnel would be immediately identified." She paused, studying my reaction carefully.
"This is not a decision to take lightly, Lieutenant."
"Accepting this assignment means creating and maintaining a completely fabricated personal history. It means lying to the people closest to you, potentially for years. It means missing family events, breaking promises, and watching people you love draw their own conclusions about your character and choices." At 22, fresh from the structured environment of Princeton and naval officer training, I thought I understood what she was asking. I had excelled at compartmentalization during my NROTC training, keeping military and civilian aspects of my life neatly separated. How difficult could it be to extend that principle to cover operations? I accepted the assignment immediately. The first step was creating the cover story that would define my relationship with my family for the next 15 years. Working with a team of specialists who understood both operational security and psychological credibility, we crafted a narrative that would explain my mysterious absences and vague career descriptions without raising enough suspicion to trigger detailed investigation. The story we settled on was both simple and devastating. I had dropped out of Princeton during my final semester due to academic burnout and mental health struggles. Unable to complete my degree despite being so close to graduation, I had moved to Washington, D.C., and eventually found work in government consulting, a field vague enough to explain inconsistent schedules and limited details about daily responsibilities. The beauty of the cover story was its emotional authenticity. Every family has watched a high-achieving member suddenly flame out under pressure. The narrative of the burned-out perfectionist was believable precisely because it played into existing family dynamics and societal expectations about the pressure faced by overachievers. Implementing the deception required careful choreography. I had to return home for what would appear to be a devastating conversation with my parents, confessing that I had been struggling academically and emotionally, that the pressure to maintain my perfect record had become overwhelming, and that I had made the difficult decision to leave Princeton before completing my degree. The conversation took place in my father's study on a rainy Thursday evening in November. I had rehearsed the key points during the drive from Norfolk, practicing the right mixture of shame, disappointment, and defensive justification that would make the story convincing. But nothing had prepared me for the look of genuine heartbreak on my mother's face when I delivered the fabricated confession. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, reaching across the leather sofa to take my hand. "Why didn't you tell us you were struggling? We could have helped, gotten you counseling, taken some pressure off." My father's reaction was more complex. I could see him cycling through disappointment, confusion, and what might have been relief that there was finally an explanation for changes in my behavior over recent months. "Maya, you were so close to finishing. Are you certain this is the right decision? We could speak with the dean, arrange for a medical leave, and find some way to complete your degree." I had to convince them that the decision was final, that I needed to step away from academic achievement and find a different path forward. Every word felt like a betrayal, not just of their trust, but of the daughter they had raised and believed in. But operational security demanded complete commitment to the deception. The hardest part was watching their hopes for my future crumble in real time. My father had already been planning conversations about law school or graduate programs. My mother had been anticipating my graduation ceremony, imagining the pride of watching her eldest daughter achieve the academic success that had always defined our family's values. Instead, I gave them a daughter who had apparently cracked under pressure, who was moving to Washington to pursue some vague career in consulting that none of us could really define. The disappointment was palpable, but so was their concern for my well-being. They were hurt and confused, but they were also loving parents trying to support a child who seemed to be struggling. Rebecca's reaction was perhaps the most difficult to navigate. As someone who had always existed somewhat in my shadow academically, she was genuinely shocked by my apparent failure, but I could also detect something that might have been relief. Relief that the family's golden child had revealed herself to be human after all. "I just don't understand," she said during a private conversation in my childhood bedroom. "You were always the one who had everything figured out. If you couldn't handle the pressure, what does that mean for the rest of us?" I had to provide enough emotional authenticity to make the story believable without crossing into genuine vulnerability that might compromise operational security. It was a delicate balance, offering just and truth about stress and pressure to validate the cover story, while protecting the reality of my actual circumstances. David, still in high school at the time, took the news with the adaptability of a 16-year-old who had other priorities. He was disappointed, but not devastated, more focused on his own social and academic life than on the implications of his sister's apparent academic failure. The move to Washington was both liberating and isolating. For the first time in my adult life, I was living completely independently in an apartment that naval intelligence had secured under my cover identity. My days were spent in intensive training programs that taught me everything from advanced surveillance techniques to cultural adaptation strategies for international operations. The work was intellectually demanding in ways that Princeton had never been. Instead of analyzing historical conflicts or theoretical policy scenarios, I was learning to assess real-time threats, decode intercepted communications, and develop strategies for infiltrating networks that posed genuine danger to American interests. My first assignment came 6 months after the cover story was established. I was deployed to Southeast Asia as part of a joint task force tracking arms, smuggling networks that were supplying weapons to terrorist organizations throughout the region. The operation required me to pose as a freelance journalist, researching economic development in port cities. A cover that allowed me to travel extensively while gathering intelligence on shipping patterns and suspicious cargo movements. For 3 months, I lived as Maya Walker, independent contractor and aspiring writer, while simultaneously operating as Lieutenant Maya Walker, naval intelligence analyst. The compartmentalization was complete. My landlord in Bangkok knew nothing about my military service, while my commanding officers knew nothing about my personal relationships with the sources I cultivated in the journalism community. The operation was successful beyond expectations. Intelligence I gathered led to the interdiction of 2 major arms shipments and the arrest of key figures in the smuggling network. More importantly, the intelligence revealed connections to larger terrorist financing operations that became targets for subsequent missions. But success came with personal costs that I was only beginning to understand. During my months overseas, I missed Rebecca's medical school graduation ceremony, explaining my absence with vague references to work commitments that my family interpreted as evidence of my continued lack of direction. I also missed my grandmother's 80th birthday celebration, another disappointment that added to the growing narrative of Maya the unreliable daughter. Each missed event required careful explanation, balancing the need to maintain my cover with the desire to preserve family relationships. I became an expert at crafting apologies that expressed genuine regret while providing no useful information about my actual activities. The psychological toll was more significant than I had anticipated. Living a complete lie with the people closest to me required constant mental vigilance. Every phone conversation had to be carefully managed. Every family visit required preparation to ensure consistency in my cover story. I found myself maintaining detailed notes about previous conversations to avoid contradictions that might raise suspicions. But the most difficult aspect was the enforced isolation from authentic emotional connection. I couldn't share my professional successes with anyone outside the intelligence community. When operations went well, when my analysis prevented terrorist attacks or saved lives, I had no one to celebrate with who understood the full significance of the achievements. Instead, I returned home to family gatherings where I was treated with the polite concern reserved for relatives who haven't quite gotten their lives together. The contrast between my professional reality and my family's perception created a cognitive dissonance that grew more difficult to manage with each passing month. By the end of my first year in deep cover operations, I had contributed to intelligence that disrupted 3 major terrorist plots and earned commendations from senior officers across multiple agencies. I had also become, in my family's eyes, the daughter who couldn't seem to find direction, who worked at some unimpressive consulting job that barely seemed to pay the bills. The foundation was set for a career of extraordinary professional achievement, shadowed by personal isolation and family disappointment. I thought I was prepared for the challenges, but I was discovering that the human cost of operational security was far greater than any training manual could convey. By my 3rd year in naval intelligence, the weight of living 2 completely different lives had begun to manifest in ways I never anticipated. The successful completion of 7 major operations across 4 continents had earned me rapid promotions and the respect of senior officers throughout the intelligence community. At 25, I had been promoted to lieutenant commander, making me one of the youngest officers to achieve that rank in naval intelligence. But none of that professional recognition could offset the growing strain of watching my family's perception of me deteriorate with each missed holiday, each vague explanation, each moment when I had to choose between operational security and personal relationships. The breaking point came during Rebecca's wedding weekend in Martha's Vineyard. She had been planning the ceremony for 18 months, a lavish celebration that represented everything the Walker family valued: tradition, elegance, and social connections that spanned generations of Connecticut society. As the maid of honor, I was expected to be present for the entire wedding week, participating in rehearsal dinners, bridesmaid luncheons, and the kind of family bonding that had become increasingly difficult for me to navigate. 3 days before I was scheduled to fly to Boston, I received emergency deployment orders. Intelligence had uncovered a terrorist cell planning coordinated attacks on American naval facilities in the Mediterranean. The threat was imminent, the intelligence actionable, and my specific expertise in maritime security analysis made me essential to the response team. I stared at the deployment orders in my apartment, feeling the familiar crushing sensation that came with these impossible choices: miss my sister's wedding, and confirm my family's growing suspicion that I simply didn't prioritize them, or ignore a direct order that could result in American casualties and the destruction of critical naval infrastructure. The choice, of course, was never really a choice at all. The phone call to Rebecca was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I had rehearsed various explanations during the drive to the secure facility where I would receive my final briefing, but none of them felt adequate when I heard her voice, bright with excitement about final wedding preparations. "Maya, please tell me you're calling with good news about your flight arrival time," she said, the happiness in her voice making what I had to say even more painful. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry, but there's been an emergency at work. I have to travel unexpectedly, and I won't be able to make it to the wedding." The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to wonder if the call had been disconnected. When Rebecca finally spoke, her voice had transformed completely. "You're not coming to my wedding." It wasn't a question but a statement delivered with the kind of controlled fury that Rebecca had perfected during medical residency. 2 days before the ceremony, you're telling me that your consulting job, whatever it actually is more important than your sister's wedding. I tried to explain that it wasn't a choice, that the situation was truly an emergency. But Rebecca cut me off with the precision of a surgeon making a difficult incision. "Maya, I have spent months defending you to relatives who asked why my maid of honor seemed so disconnected from the wedding planning. I have made excuses for your inability to participate in dress fittings because of your mysterious travel schedule. I have told everyone that your work is demanding but important, even though none of us actually understand what you do." Her voice was building towards something I had never heard from her before, not disappointment, but genuine anger. "But missing my actual wedding? There is no work emergency that justifies this. There is no consulting crisis that matters more than being here for the most important day of my life. This is about priorities, Maya, and you have made yours crystal clear." The conversation ended with Rebecca hanging up, but not before delivering a final assessment that would haunt me for years. "Mom always said you were just going through a difficult phase, that you would eventually find your way back to being the sister we used to know. But I'm starting to think this is just who you are now." I completed the Mediterranean deployment successfully. The intelligence analysis my team provided led to the prevention of coordinated attacks that would have killed hundreds of American service members and civilian contractors. The operation earned me a Navy Commendation Medal and recognition from NATO intelligence officials. I returned from deployment to find wedding photos that Rebecca had pointedly not shared with me directly. Instead, I saw them on social media. Images of a perfect ceremony, where my absence was filled by our cousin Jennifer, who had stepped in as a replacement maid of honor. The family photos showed Rebecca radiant in her dress, my parents beaming with pride, David looking handsome in his groom's-in tuxedo, and a conspicuous gap where I should have been standing. The missed wedding became a turning point in family dynamics. What had previously been disappointment about my apparent lack of direction transformed into something harder to repair: the perception that I simply didn't care enough about family to prioritize important events. My mother's phone calls became less frequent and more formal. Instead of the warm, meandering conversations we used to have about books, current events, and family news, Our interactions became perfunctory check-ins that felt more like obligation than genuine connection. "How's work?" she would ask, the question carrying undertones of skepticism about whatever work I claimed to be doing. "Fine, Mom, busy, but fine. And you're taking care of yourself? Eating properly?" "Yes, I'm fine." The conversations would continue in this stilted pattern, both of us avoiding the topics that might lead to conflict or require explanations. I couldn't provide. She stopped asking about my romantic life after I deflected one too many inquiries about whether I was dating anyone. She stopped sharing family gossip when it became clear that I often couldn't respond appropriately due to travel or deployment schedules. My father's reaction was different, but equally painful. He simply stopped discussing me with extended family and social acquaintances. During family gatherings, conversations about his children would focus extensively on Rebecca's medical career and David's academic achievements, while references to me became vague and brief. "Maya is still in Washington," he would say when asked, then immediately redirect the conversation to safer topics. I learned about this pattern from David, who mentioned it with the casual cruelty of a younger brother who didn't understand the full implications of what he was describing. "Dad doesn't really talk about you anymore when his friends ask," David said during one of our infrequent phone conversations. "I think he's embarrassed about the whole Princeton thing and doesn't know how to explain what you're doing now." The irony was crushing. My father, who had built his career on principles of justice and public service, was embarrassed by a daughter who was actually dedicating her life to protecting American interests and saving lives. But he couldn't know that, and operational security meant I couldn't even hint at the reality. The professional demands were escalating along with the personal costs. By my fourth year in naval intelligence, I was leading analysis teams for operations that spanned multiple agencies and international partners. My expertise in maritime terrorism had made me one of the go-to analysts for threats involving port security, shipping interdiction, and naval facility protection. The assignments were becoming more complex and more crucial to national security. I spent 6 months in Germany coordinating intelligence sharing with European allies on terrorist financing networks. I led a team that developed new analytical protocols for identifying weapons smuggling operations in the South China Sea. I briefed senior Pentagon officials on emerging threats to Pacific Fleet operations. Each professional achievement felt simultaneously meaningful and hollow. I was making a genuine difference in protecting American lives and interests. But I couldn't share that satisfaction with anyone who mattered to me personally. The isolation was compounded by the nature of intelligence work itself. My colleagues understood the demands of the job, but they also had their own operational security requirements. Friendships within the intelligence community were necessarily limited by need-to-know protocols and security clearances. I couldn't form deep personal connections with people who only knew portions of my professional identity. Meanwhile, maintaining friendships with college classmates or civilian acquaintances required constant deception about my actual career and activities. I became an expert at changing subjects, deflecting questions, and providing just enough information to seem engaged without revealing anything substantive about my real life. The psychological toll manifested in ways that surprised me. I developed insomnia, lying awake at night replaying conversations with family members, analyzing every word for signs that my cover might be compromised. I found myself constantly vigilant about consistency in my fabricated personal history, maintaining detailed mental notes about previous lies to avoid contradictions. More troubling was the growing difficulty in distinguishing between operational deception and personal authenticity. After years of carefully managing every interaction with family members, I was losing touch with my genuine emotional responses. When my mother expressed concern about my apparent career struggles, I had to consciously access real feelings of love and appreciation beneath the layers of fabricated persona I had constructed. The situation reached a crisis point during my 27th birthday. My parents had planned a small family celebration, the kind of intimate gathering that had once been sources of joy and connection, but sitting around the dinner table in my childhood home, listening to careful conversation that avoided any topics that might lead to uncomfortable questions about my life, I felt like an actor who had forgotten how to connect with the character she was playing. "Rebecca," still maintaining polite distance since the wedding incident, made perfunctory conversation about her residency. David, now in college himself, seemed more interested in his phone than in family interaction. My parents tried valiantly to maintain normal family dynamics, but the effort was visible and painful to witness. During dessert, my father made a comment that crystallized everything I had been trying not to acknowledge. Maya, your mother and I have been talking, and we want you to know that we're proud of you for working through your difficulties. We know the transition after leaving Princeton was challenging, and we understand that finding your professional direction has taken time, but we're concerned that you seem isolated, that work, whatever it involves, has become your entire life. He paused, choosing his words carefully with the precision of a judge delivering a difficult verdict. We worry that you're sacrificing personal relationships and family connections for a career that doesn't seem to provide you with much satisfaction or stability. Sometimes it's worth considering whether the path you're on is truly serving your best interests. The assessment was delivered with love and genuine concern, but it represented such a complete inversion of reality that I struggled to formulate any response. My career was providing me with extraordinary satisfaction and had achieved remarkable stability through rapid promotion and increasing responsibility. But the path I was on had indeed required sacrificing personal relationships and family connections. The difference was that those sacrifices were in service of protecting American lives and national security interests, not in pursuit of some undefined consulting career that my family imagined I was struggling to maintain. I thanked them for their concern and assured them that I was happy with my professional choices, but the conversation left me feeling more isolated than ever. The people who loved me most in the world were worried about my well-being based on a completely fabricated understanding of my life circumstances. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my career. I requested assignment to the most demanding and sensitive operations available, throwing myself into work that would require extended deployments and minimal family contact. If I was going to pay the personal cost of operational security, I would ensure that the professional contribution justified the sacrifice. I had no idea that this decision would lead to achievements that would eventually make the truth impossible to hide, setting the stage for revelations that would change everything about my family relationships. The secure phone in my hand felt heavier than any weapon I had ever carried in 15 years of naval service. Admiral Thompson's voice on the other end was calm, professional, but I could detect the underlying concern that came with making a decision that would fundamentally alter operational protocols. Admiral Walker, I want to be absolutely clear about what you're requesting, he said, using my rank with the kind of emphasis that reminded me how far I had come from the young Princeton graduate who had first accepted a classified assignment. You're asking for permission to reveal your true identity and service record to civilian family members during an active memorial service. Yes, sir, I replied, watching through the cathedral windows as the honor guard began positioning themselves near my mother's casket. The situation has reached a point where operational security concerns are secondary to family reconciliation. My mother deserves to be honored by all her children, not just the ones my siblings deem acceptable. There was a pause as Admiral Thompson considered the unprecedented nature of the request. In 15 years of deep cover operations, no officer had ever asked for permission to break cover during a family crisis. The protocols simply didn't exist for this situation. Admiral, your service record is exemplary, and your judgment has never been questioned. If you believe this revelation serves both personal and operational interests, you have my authorization to proceed, but understand that once this line is crossed, there's no returning to your previous cover status. I understand, sir. Thank you. As I ended the call, the cathedral doors opened and a procession emerged that would change everything my family thought they knew about Maya Walker. 6 Navy SEALs in dress blues marched in perfect formation toward the cathedral entrance, carrying between them a folded American flag and a presentation case that contained medals and commendations spanning 15 years of classified service. The lead SEAL, Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, had served under my command during a counter-terrorism operation in the Philippines 2 years earlier. When I had contacted him that morning, explaining the situation and requesting assistance, His response had been immediate and unquestioning. "Admiral, you saved my team's lives in Manila. If you need us to honor your mother and set the record straight with your family, we'll be there within the hour." Now, watching them approach the cathedral with military precision, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. Everything I had protected for 15 years was about to be exposed in the most public way possible. I approached the cathedral entrance just as the SEALs reached the front steps. Master Chief Rodriguez spotted me immediately and called his team to attention. "Admiral Walker," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the morning air, "we're here to ensure your mother receives the honors due to the family of a distinguished naval officer." The words hung in the air like a depth charge, creating ripples of confusion among the mourners who were beginning to exit the cathedral. I could see my family through the glass doors, frozen in confusion as they tried to process what they were witnessing. Rebecca appeared first, her face cycling through bewilderment, recognition, and something that might have been shocking. She had spent the morning delivering a eulogy about our mother's pride in her children's achievements, carefully avoiding any mention of me, except to note that I was traveling for work and unable to attend. David emerged next, his legal training helping him process information more quickly than emotional reaction would allow. I could see him making connections, reassessing everything he thought he knew about his sister's mysterious career and frequent absences. My father came last, his judicial composure intact, but his eyes sharp with the kind of analytical assessment that had made him an effective judge. He was studying the SEALs, their bearing, their obvious respect for military protocol, and drawing conclusions that were fundamentally altering his understanding of his eldest daughter. Master Chief Rodriguez stepped forward and spoke directly to my family, his words formal but carrying genuine respect. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker, I'm Master Chief Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs. We're here to honor Catherine Walker, whose daughter Admiral Maya Walker has served with extraordinary distinction in naval intelligence operations for the past 15 years. The title Admiral hit my family like a physical force. I watched my mother's teachings about literature come to life. The moment when hidden truth transforms everything that came before, when the real story emerges from beneath layers of carefully constructed deception. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth, a gesture I recognized from childhood moments of genuine surprise. David actually stepped backward, as if the information required physical space to process. My father's expression was unreadable, but I could see his mind working through implications and reassessments at the speed that had made him a respected jurist. "That's impossible," Rebecca whispered, but even as she spoke, I could see recognition dawning. The unexplained scars, the mysterious travel, the vague career descriptions that never quite made sense. Everything was clicking into place with the terrible clarity of a puzzle finally solved. Master Chief Rodriguez continued with the kind of respectful authority that only senior enlisted personnel could command. "Admiral Walker has led operations that have saved countless American lives and protected critical national security interests. Her mother deserves to be honored, not just as Catherine Walker, beloved teacher and community member, but as the mother of one of the Navy's most distinguished intelligence officers." He gestured to his team, who stepped forward to present the folded flag and the case containing my medals and commendations. The presentation was conducted with full military honors, each movement precise and meaningful in the way that military ceremonies honor both the living and the dead. As the ceremony concluded, the SEALs stepped back to attention, creating a space for family interaction that felt both protected and exposed. For the first time in 15 years, I stood before my family as Rear Admiral Maya Walker, United States Navy, rather than Maya the disappointing dropout. The silence stretched, long enough for me to wonder if the revelation had been too sudden, too overwhelming for productive conversation. Then my mother's voice reached us from memory, her words about understanding which story we were living and whether we wanted to be protagonists or supporting characters in our own narratives. My father spoke first, his judicial training helping him navigate the unprecedented situation. "Maya," he said, and I could hear him testing the name against this new understanding of who I was. "Admiral Walker. I think we need to have a very long conversation." "Yes, sir," I replied automatically. 15 years of military bearing responding to the authority in his voice. Rebecca stepped forward, tears streaming down her face in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. All those times I was angry about your absences, about missing my wedding, about not being there for family events. She stopped, struggling with the magnitude of reassessment required. You were serving your country. You were saving lives. I was doing my job, I said simply, but I was also missing my family, and that was the hardest part of any assignment. David, ever practical, asked the question that would define our future relationship. How much can you tell us now? How much of the real story can we finally know? I considered the question carefully, weighing operational security against family reconciliation. Some things will always be classified, I admitted. But the basic truth is that I've spent 15 years in naval intelligence, rising to admiral rank through operations I can't discuss in detail. The dropout story was a cover identity required for operational security. Every absence, every vague explanation, every time I seemed disconnected from family events, it was because I was serving in ways I couldn't explain. My mother's memorial service had transformed into something she never could have anticipated, but would have appreciated, a moment of truth that brought her family together through honesty rather than maintaining division through necessary deception. As we stood outside the cathedral, surrounded by SEALs who had come to honor my mother and reveal my service, I felt the burden of 15 years of secrecy beginning to lift. The conversations ahead would be difficult, the rebuilding of trust would take time, but for the first time since accepting that first classified assignment, I could imagine a future where my professional achievements and personal relationships existed in the same reality. Mom would have loved this, Rebecca said suddenly, laughing through her tears. All those years she kept saying she knew there was more to your story than you were telling us. She would have been so proud to know she was right. My father nodded slowly, his judicial mind still processing, but his paternal heart beginning to understand. Catherine always said you were serving something greater than yourself, even when we couldn't see what that was. I think she would be proud to know that her instincts about her daughter were correct. As the morning progressed and we began the difficult but necessary work of rebuilding relationships on a foundation of truth rather than deception, I realized that my mother's memorial had become exactly what she would have wanted. A moment when her family chose honesty over comfort, connection over convention, and love over judgment. The SEALs remained at attention until we were ready to leave, an honor guard for both the dead and the living, witnesses to the moment when 15 years of necessary lies gave way to the possibility of authentic family connection. For the first time in 15 years I walked away from a family gathering as myself. Admiral Maya Walker, daughter, sister, and naval officer, finally able to exist as one complete person rather than fragments carefully compartmentalized to protect both national security and family relationships. The double life was over. Real life, complicated, challenging but authentic, was finally beginning. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.